Hey team, welcome back to Spec. The engine for Faith has been delivered and I got a little bit more than I expected. It actually came K-frame and all. I jerry-rigged some suspension on there and the old XR8 wheels so I can move it around easy. What do you reckon? And then I've got a shelf full of FGX, wiring harness, pedals, dash, computer, BCM, all sorts of stuff, all ready to get it going. But I'm scrolling on Marketplace and I see a picture that speaks to me. I have to stop looking at Marketplace. And what do I find? I find this. I find this 1997 EL drift car. That first picture that you put on your Marketplace ad is the most important, because when I saw this thing doing a 6 skid, I had to go have a look at it. And when I saw it in person, I'm like, yes, this needs to come home with me. Now it's got a little secret under the bonnet. You want to have a look? This one's got a Barra in it already. This is a BABF Barra, but it's essentially what we want to do with Faith. So what I thought is, why don't we get this one and get it ready for a track day? So I've already got it booked in for a track day in a couple of weeks. We're going to have to do some work to get it ready. So it's sitting on chop springs. So I want to change the springs out. I want to do some work with the brakes. I want to change the fluids, and then a little bit of a tidy up, because being a drift car, it's got a little bit of damage on it. I'll give you a bit of a look inside. It's had EF XR6 mostly seats put in. Some harness straps. Now, I originally thought that this car, through its life, it might have got an EF XR6 engine and transmission, especially since there's a bit of the interior pieces floating about. But I was looking at the VIN code for the transmission and it's a K, and that normally means it was factory fitted with a manual. The other thing that makes me think it was factory manual is that the shift knob is actually grey, and I believe the XR series ones were black. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. It's got a bit of rust like a lot of them do at this age, and there's a little damage here, but the best damage, don't worry, it'll buff out. So yeah, we better start jacking it up and get back to work. So it came with a collection of bits and pieces, and then some of this stuff I bought myself too. So the front bar came with the car, the King rear springs came with the car, the Munro front shocks came with the car, those old struts and other front springs came with the car, and the rear shocks. There's a bag of old filters and whatnot. Front bar, if I didn't say that before. Headlight, tail light, Watt's link, because the Watt link is actually bent in this. And so I bought a set of King front springs to match the rear springs, and Munro rear shocks to match the front shocks, and some brake pads. Started by removing the wheel. And then completely remove the brake caliper. More on that later. Then undid the sway bar, top ball joint and bottom shock mount. After doing the top nuts, I pulled the whole shock out. There we go. Using my spring compressor, I separated the old spring and the shock so I could reuse the top hat. And then installed it onto new Munro shock and King springs. Oh, now that we've assembled the strut, just time to put it all back together. Then I did the opposite as before. Tighten up the bottom of the strut. Then the top ball joint. The sway bar, and finally the top nuts. And there it is, nicely installed. Now I just need to do the other side and torque everything up. The only difference with the passenger side is I'm going to have to get rid of the computer to undo the top strut mount. But one thing I did notice is it looks like it's using the factory B series bracket and it bolts straight in. So if you're doing a Barra swap on an E series, that's a bit of a tip, because we'll go have a look at my FGX. It's pretty much the same bracket. Now the brakes. I tried to push the pistons back, but they wouldn't return far enough to fit over the disc. When I pop them out of the caliper, you can see the scale and build up on them. So now is a perfect time for a rebuild. So we cleaned the pistons and calipers up, put new rubbers in it, and then put them back together. Inserted new pads and whacked them back on. It's a little bit dark under there, but to meet the rules, I need to have a rear exiting exhaust. And so this one here dumps just before the axle. But I was looking at this flange here, and then on the old XR6, looking at the flange just behind the cap. I don't know if you can see it there. And they're in about the same place. So I'm gonna rip this exhaust off because we're not gonna use it on this one anyway. And it might get me out of trouble, or it might get me in trouble. If you haven't been following along, this XR6 went under a flow to about mid steering wheel level. Funnily enough, the low section of the pipe was full of water. Luckily I caught it and it didn't make a massive mess. I just realised that there's no flanges back from the one that's behind the cat. I was looking at the rules again, and the rules just say that the exhaust needs to be rear exiting behind the rear wheel. So what I'm thinking is if I do cut the exhaust in this section of pipe here, it'll still be pointing out away from the fuel tank behind the rear wheel, and it'll still get me out of trouble. I'd weld it again and put a flange probably back in where the muffler is, but I don't have a welder at the moment, so we're gonna have to live with what we got. Finally got the pipe out. Oh my goodness, what an effort. So cut the pipe here, that was no problem. And we've got this, we've got an exhaust shop to make up this outside inside attachment so that we can join the exhaust back up again. But we had to end up pulling half the rear suspension apart so that we could drop the diff down low enough to get the long piece of the exhaust out. It's an absolute mission. A lot of cursing, a lot of swearing, but it's out now. We've got to change the shocks and springs and stuff in the rear of this one anyway. So we're going to pull, and the rear Watts link as well because it's bent. So we're going to do the same thing here, pull most of the suspension apart, drop the diff down as low as possible, and hopefully we can feed it back in over the top. I started by removing the rear shock bolt, then I took off the Watts link, and finally undid the top shock bolt and removed the spring and shock. Once both sides were out, we fed the new exhaust in, which compared to out was easy. For now, I just mounted the rear section loosely. I didn't want to tighten it down until I made sure the tyre wouldn't rub. New springs and shocks are in. I thought it'd be worthy to mention that as I was jacking the diff to line up the shocks, the car started to actually lift once the springs took load. So the car was too light for the actual spring rate. So I needed to add a bit of weight, and I was thinking it'd be nice if I had an extra person here to like sit on the boot, but then I'm like, I've got heaps of stuff. So now I've got a boot full of tyres. Now have a look at that. All the rear suspension is back in, tightened and torqued. I ended up using the sway bar bushes from the XR6 because they're in better condition than what was on this car. Watts links in, and I also thought it's a good time to chuck a tyre on to make sure that exhaust that we fitted will clear. So here we go, tyre on, exhaust clears perfectly. Now we can button up all the exhaust. That's all good to go. And yeah, you might have noticed there's a spicy race tyre on there. Both the engine mounts were broken, so we ended up removing the airbox to help pull out the engine mount. Luckily enough, the champion who sold me the car knew they were broken and supplied me new ones. On the driver's side, it probably would have been a pretty quick job because the engine lifted up really easily. However, somebody had previously put in the engine mount bolt the wrong way, It was pointing in that direction, and when you wanted to remove it, it was actually smashing against the steering rack. So we had to disconnect the steering rack and the steering column so that we could move it enough to get the bolt out. But if it had been installed that way, straight in, we would have been in and out in like 2 seconds. If you're putting an engine in, have a look at what might be in the way later and have a think about it. And here we have it. Both engine mounts are back in. Luckily, we checked the transmission mount. There was a little bit of a problem there, so we chucked a new one in while we're at it. Now is a good stage to drop the engine oil out of the engine and the gearbox. The engine oil was looking a bit black, but after putting a new filter on, we filled it up with fresh oil again. While putting it back together, I also replaced the broken filter on the catch can and threw in a new K&N air filter. Okay, I'll be mucking around with the front a little bit, taking the front bar off, and the passenger side headlight was smashed because that side of the car had nosed into the wall at some stage. But anyway, the car came with another headlight, so I've been mucking around and I've got it to fit, so we've got one mount that won't join anymore, but the other three do. But now I've come into a little bit of another problem, is the bonnet, when it got stowed into the wall, it too is now going to hit the headlight. So I'm going to have to do some massaging on the edge of this bonnet. And massage it we did. With a bit of a tweak using multi-grips, the bonnet came flat-ish. While we were at it, we used a porta power to push the front out somewhat. And then did a bit more multi-grips. And a bit of hammering to straighten things out. Then moved on to the back guard, where we went from this to this and mounted the missing rear tail light. I also took the opportunity to give the guards a bit of a roll to make sure I had enough clearance. Have a look, just like it came off the factory floor. The boot latch was too far out of alignment to work, so I also took the next logical step and pinned the boot down. Finally, got it back on the ground. Time to send it out for a wheel alignment. When she came back, we dropped the coolant out and flushed the radiator. Then we topped it all up with new coolant. So under the bonnet, before the coolant went in, we changed the thermostat for safety, properly mounted the catch can because it was just floating around about on cable ties, stole the intake snorkel from poor Faith, and put a new radiator cap too. Now all that's left is to put the front bar back on. Bumpers on! That's the last job done. The 4 standard bumper mounts went in, and then we have 2 cable ties on each side. And then even the plastic panels, some of the scrivets were missing. But I had some old ones lying around from when I replaced the grille on the ute, so I whacked them in here. Okay team, that's it. She's race ready. Well, as race ready as she will be. Next time you see this, she's going to be flying down the main straight at Queensland Raceway. It was a bit of a crunch, about a week of spin and spanners on this thing, so I'm not sure if I caught everything, and if I've missed some stuff, well then sorry. But basically we've done all front suspension, all rear suspension, we've done up the front brakes, engine mounts, ended up having to do the transmission mount as well. All the fluids have gone through, new thermostat, new radiator cap. There was the catch can, we sorted out the catch can. Oh, and then we did some panel work. How beautiful is the panel work? And look at that beautiful duct tape. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see how she goes. Hit that like if you like what we've done here, or even if you don't, just if you like the video. And in the comments below, let me know what you would have done extra. Until next time, remember there's more to going fast than going fast. See you later.